do it, man.
Welcome to the Copy Closer podcast. We've got Chris Haddad on the motherfucking show. What's up, Chris?
Oh, we get to swear in this one? That's great.
Oh, we get to swear.
I love swearing on and things in general. I'm great, man. It actually reminds me, years ago, I was on Jeff Walker's stage. Actually, this was a big thing for me years and years ago. I'll probably talk about it if we go through the history of Chris Haddad. But I was on Jeff Walker's stage. It was like one of the first really big speaking gigs I did. And Jeff said two things before he introduced me. He said, get ready to listen fast, because I tend to talk pretty quickly, especially then. And then he said he gave me a swear jar, and he said, like, I have to put $1 in the swear jar. Maybe it was $100 or something every single time I had to swear. And I was like, Jeff, there's swears on my slides. Like, what am I supposed to do? You could have warned me, man. You could have warned me. But that's okay.
No, well, dude, you're the man. It's funny because I like secretly stalked you before we connected on Facebook. Yeah, he's like, oh shit. I secretly stalked your offers and stalked a bunch of your stuff, and I was like, dude, whoever this is freaking killing it. And then I found out the truth behind the alternate personality online, and I was like, holy shit, I knew it. Who is this person? I'm like, I gotta connect with him.
Yeah, so, alter egos are a funny thing. Fame is a funny thing. My tiny little brush with fame, my tiny little one.
Well, I'd love to get into that, actually, because you've got
whatever you want to get into.
Yeah, dude, I'd love, because you got millions of followers literally on Facebook that follow that alter ego. So I can only imagine.
They do. I am very, very happy that he is not me in a lot of ways. I am very, very happy to have created a alter ego. Why don't we do this in like chronological order if you want to ask?
Yeah, let's do it, man. So what did you do even before you got into marketing, into copy, and what were you doing before that? And how did you even get into this business?
So I was mostly starving and hating my life back then. I'm 41 now, and let's see, I graduated from college in 1999, and I moved to so my dad died when I was 19. And I was in college. I had long hair. I had like big glasses. I was about 40 pounds lighter than I am now. I had no self-esteem. I had no game with women or anything. Like, I'd never talked to anybody. Like, people that know me now think I'm this, like, big kind of boisterous whatever, which is true. But when I was younger, not at all. So when I get a lot of like younger guys come to me for advice on a variety of things these days, especially in marketing things, because I'm well known and they see me talking to women and stuff like that, because I love women. Women are great. But yeah, back in those days, I was totally horrible and like whatever. So I moved from Boston, Massachusetts, where I went to university, all the way out to Los Angeles, California. And I spent 2 years there. And the idea I vaguely had in my head was that I would be a screenwriter or some
screenwriter?
A screenwriter or a TV writer or something like that. And I really didn't have the drive at that point in my life. Honestly, I was there. Looking back on it now, there is like kind of a thing to add to this, which is about 1.5 years ago, I got diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, right? And so looking back on my life over the last 20, 30, almost 41 years, that colors everything. Right? Like, looking back on it now, I can see many times in my life when the bipolar was causing massive issues. And of course, I had no idea what was going on. I thought because I was, when you have bipolar 2, bipolar 1, you kind of shift back and forth between mania and depression, right? So like when you're manic, you might think you're Jesus Christ. You probably think you're the greatest thing in the world. You get a lot of work done, etc. And then when you're depressed, you hate your life. With bipolar 2, you spend about 90% of your time horrifyingly depressed, and about 10% of the time in what's called hypomania, where you're not quite, like, you don't think you're Jesus. You don't think you're like, the God of the world or anything, but you think, you're pretty fucking cool. And certainly people that have known me for a while would talk about my tremendous ego, especially like 5 or 6 years ago. I like to think that it's lesser now.
Which is crazy, because when I met you in person for like all of 10 seconds or whatever, at traffic and conversions, I'm like, the guy seems so nice and genuine, and we gave each other a nice hug. I'm like,
why not? Yeah.
Coolest dude ever.
Well, thank you very much. I've gone through a lot of changes, and I've been humbled quite a bit over the last 5 or 6 years. It's been a very challenging. I think you follow me on Facebook a little bit, so it's been a very challenging time.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went to LA, and I spent 2 years in LA, and I did a bunch of temp work. I worked on shows like That 70s Show and stuff like that, doing like PA work, basically. I almost ran over, what is his name? The guy that was on Third Rock from the Sun. I almost ran him over in a parking lot once, like the main guy, the older guy. And then like I worked at this company called Lockstream that was like a digital rights management company. And I was an assistant, right? So I was like 24 years old. I'm a pretty smart guy. I thought I was a pretty smart guy there, but I had no focus. I had no ability to and I couldn't make myself just do the bullshit, right? And that's part of my ADD. That's part of the bipolar, but I was just always really bad at just doing a job, right? Much like many people in our industry who are the island of misfit toys, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But so I did that, and then I was there for about 2 years, and at a certain point they decided to close the LA office, and they said to me and 2 other guys in the office, hey, you can either be laid off in LA, which I had done a lot of already. I have so many stories about being a temp in LA, and the time that Hillary Swank told me to get the fuck out of her house because a parrot invited me in, and a bunch of, there's some good stories. There's some really good stories, which is funny because I bring those up sometimes. People are like, you have a really interesting life. I'm like, I think so.
That's so awesome.
So anyway, they told me they could move me up to Seattle, or I could be laid off in LA, and I didn't want to be laid off. So they moved me up to Seattle, and I was in Bellevue for about 3 months. They put us up in a house there, and they were trying to make me be a project manager, which is the funniest thing in the world to anybody that actually knows me, right? Details are not my jam. I have employees for details. Mike, who works with me, he's great. He handles the details. I do the crazy creative stuff. It works really well because he respects what I do and I respect what he does. And he knows that I'm insane. And he's like, yeah, you're insane, but when you work, it actually makes a lot of money, so it's okay. So I did that, and then I got laid off from that job after about 3 months. And I was unemployed in my early mid-20s in Seattle for about 3 years, basically. I just could not find an actual job. I did every temp gig in the world. I worked at all these, I was watching The Office with my wife the other day, and I'm like, yeah, that used to be my life. I used to be the temp at the fucking office, right? Making $8 an hour doing filing or doing this or doing that. And I was miserable. I was so horrifyingly depressed the entire time. But it's like the fish in the water. When you're depressed all the time, you just think that's the way the world is, right? And so there is mental illness in my family, but the way how old are you?
32.
32. So, okay. So my generation was still the whole mental illness is a thing that you hide, and you never talk about it and you're ashamed of it. And even the idea of going to therapy is oh my God, what's wrong? Especially in Massachusetts, what the fuck is wrong with you? You going to therapy? Jesus. So it was one of those things, I remember my great aunt being like, there's nothing wrong with you. And that's how I felt. You just kind of push it down and push it down. So I was always smart, but I was pretty crazy and angry all the time, et cetera. So I did that for about 3 years. And then I got a job writing greeting cards for a living. I finally got a job. I got hired by this company called Postcards from the Moon, I think it was called.
How did you even find that job?
It was just
a Craigslist ad or something?
I think it was something like that. It was just something random. And they hired me for 24 grand a year. And it was I spent 9 months there, and it was a horrible experience in a lot of ways. But also, I was not a good employee. I will not pretend I was. I was not a good employee. I have always been unemployable. I am very lucky to have found this crazy industry of ours. And so I was there for 9 months. I wrote a bunch of really funny postcards. The office was run badly. The people that owned it were in their 60s, and they had decided to start this postcard company. They sank all their money into printing all these postcards because the worst possible thing happened to them. They won an award, right? They won an award for a postcard they did, and it was right around 9/11, and it was a picture of a couple of kids with flags or something, and they thought, oh my God, we have this huge success. And this applies to our industry, right? We have this huge success. It's gonna last forever. It's gonna go forever. Let's just fucking dive into it and whatever. And they also treated their employees like shit. They just did not understand. Everything I learned about how not to run a business, I really learned from those people. But I worked there for 9 months, and then eventually one day I went in and Gabe was like, hey, we have to let you go. And I was devastated. I remember I went out to my car and I just cried. I just fucking sobbed my fucking eyes out in the car. I was 24 probably. And I was just like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? I suck so much. My brother's in New York City making $500,000 a year doing finance stuff. My brother's a great guy, but we went on very, very different paths. And I just was so devastated. And I remember I went to this career counselor because I was just I need something. And she took pity on me. She only charged me $40 instead of $100 because I could not afford $100. And I remember sitting there and she was bringing me through the whole thing. And she said, okay, well, 5 years from now, what's your dream? What's your biggest dream 5 years from now? And I remember at the time I was like, man, if I can just make $45,000 a year as a writer, I'll be happy, right? That was as big as I could fucking dream. That was the absolute height of what I thought was possible for me at that point in my life. And she told me about this whole idea of copywriting, right? And the copywriting that she told me about was not what you and I do or what's in our crazy world. It was like corporate stuff, right? And so I kind of wasted about 3 years of my life. I look back now and I think about, this actually is a recurrent theme, because there's many times in my life I was afraid to take the step that I should have taken. And so I delayed it for a couple of years. And so in this case, I decided I wanted to go out and write corporate copy. I had heard of direct response, but I was like, oh my God, that shit is so scammy. Like, nobody reads that stuff. And I kind of was on my high horse about it. And so I read this book by this guy named Peter Bowerman called The Well-Fed Writer. And I ended up going to like social and networking groups, like the fucking, business networking groups in Seattle, BNI and the Chamber of Commerce and stuff like that. And I went out and I would just slowly like get a little work. I think the first job I did, I made $600 for writing a brochure. And then I did this and then I did that. And my first year as a quote unquote copywriter, I think I grossed about 13 grand or something like that. And that's what I lived off of. And I remember I bought a computer for $2 grand.
This is in Seattle?
This is in Seattle, yeah.
It's like impossible.
Oh, no, it is. Yeah. And this was a while ago. I had a really cheap apartment where water ran down the walls and you could hear the rats in the walls sometimes. It was a crazy time. And also, and then around that, I also got into a really bad car accident. I was coming in, I was in Mercer Island having a meeting with this guy, Chuck Malin, and I was wearing a suit for some reason. And I was like merging onto the 520 tunnel from Mercer Island, and I drove right into a semi-truck. I just drove right into a semi-truck. And I will tell you, I kind of came down, and like my back my rear left tire came into his front rear tire, and I got dragged along for about 100 feet, and I was in a tunnel, and then my car spun around, and my light flashed before my eyes. Actually, it didn't flash before my eyes, but I had time to think it should be. And then I hit a wall at about 60 miles an hour, and I had my right leg locked out, and about a few tons of force went up my right leg, and I exploded a disc in my back. And I already had some back problems, and I was in really shitty shape at the time, but that was one of the most important quote unquote moments of my life, because from then on for the next 3 years, I was pretty much crippled. I mean, it's funny because I have the ability to, I'm very stubborn. And I have the ability to kind of massively downplay things. Like I'd be the guy who would, have you seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Right? It's but a flesh wound. It's like your arm is off. And I was like, oh yeah, my back bugs me a little bit. If I met somebody that age now who was in the amount of pain that I was in, I'd be like, dude, you're 24 years old and you're walking around like you're 90. Like, oh my God. So I was old when I was young. And it turns out, yeah, and there's other stuff there too.
Did you, so Jesus Christ. I just got into a car wreck not too long ago. It was like a little head-on collision. And I have that where when you said, well, my life didn't flash before my eyes, but it was like slow enough where you saw it. And that was that was the scary point for me. I was like, I could die right now. I'm like, holy fuck, you know? And so you were like that for 3 years though?
I was essentially crippled for 3 years. I didn't have health insurance. I was dead broke. And I spent 3 years. So this actually is kind of a message about copywriting in a way, because one of the people asked me, Chris, why are you good at copy? And there's a few reasons. One of which is and I don't mean this, I'm like, oh my God, woe is me, my life is so worse. I know what pain is, right? Like between the back problems and Lyme disease, which I'll talk about later, and the bipolar stuff, I dealt with a lot of pain for a long time. And and my dad dying and shit like that. Like, and again, everybody's got this shit. I'm not saying that I'm like, woe is me. So I spent 3 years just in excruciating pain. I was like starting to build my business at the same time, like my other business, I'm writing, bullshit. I remember at a certain point over the first year I made like 12 grand. The second year I made like 30 gross. The third year I was like, oh my God, I'm doing great. I made $72,000 gross. Holy shit. I made 72 grand gross. And I'd heard about this guy, Harlan Kilstein. He was always posting on like the Agora forums, because I had taken the Agora course. And I was like, this is bullshit. There's no way. Like, I remember I wrote a letter and sent it in, and whoever like looked at the letter, they didn't think it was the greatest thing ever. So I was all pissed off.
Fuck this, this is a scam.
Exactly. I was so full of myself. But Harlan was doing like a course in Vegas about, I think it was called value-based copywriting. And it was about how to make more money as a copywriter. And so I was like, I have a little bit of money. I'll go do that. And so I got on the plane, and like getting on planes used to be the most excruciating thing, right? Because I was in pain. I was in massive pain. What I didn't realize at the time is that basically this, and I'm only almost done fixing it now. It took me the last 5 years of like intense work to kind of fix my body. People that see me now are like, you're not limping anymore. I'm like, I know, it took a lot of work. But like basically the whole left side of my body atrophied, right? Like looking back on it now, like basically I had no glutes, I had no like missed muscles in my left hip, like all of this. This actually hurts a lot right now because it's finally coming back online. I got really, really, really fucked up. And if you talk to friends, like I used to walk with this kind of pimp walk everywhere, and like getting on an airplane was excruciating. I had to like pop a Vicodin just to get on an airplane. And I would go to these things, and I'd bring one of those like inflatable balls with me, and I would like just put the inflatable ball in the back of the room and sit on that. I was always the guy that was just like laying down in the back of the room because I just could not sit up for that long. It was really, really bad. It was like excruciating all of the time.
What did you do to, I assume you did some kind of like self-healing stuff.
I did everything you could think of. I did acupuncture, I did massage, I tried doing yoga, I tried doing all sorts of things, but it was really bad. And after about 3 years, my ex-girlfriend and my friend Shirley and my mom all ganged up on me because women are great. And they basically forced me to get surgery, and the surgery made it livable. I was still in a lot of pain, but again, it was so much better than it had been that I was like, yeah, whatever. So I did the value-based copywriting thing, and I went and listened to that and listened to Harlan, and I ended up joining his like coaching group for like $1,000 a month. It's like, oh my God, $1,000 a month. That was an insane amount of money for me at the time. Absolutely insane.
This was how long ago, would you say?
That was 140. That was like probably when I was about 27.
Wow.
So that was like 14 years ago. And Harlan, I love Harlan. He's a great guy. It's always funny to me because he has many times over the years said, well, I trained Chris Sadat. And I'm like, yeah, to a degree. But Harlan didn't really teach me how to write copy. What Harlan taught me was how to hustle, right? Like he taught me how to get out there and get paid for writing copy. And he had great systems and knew how to do that. I really learned how to write copy more from like John Carlton and David Garfinkel and people.
Did you work with them personally or like through their courses or something?
I worked personally with David Garfinkel for a couple of years. We became really good friends. I basically stalked him and made him teach me things, and it worked out well.
That's awesome. He was just on the show recently. That's cool. We have both of you guys on.
I fucking love David. He's great. And again, he taught me a lot, and I really look up to him in a lot of ways. So I did that, and then started kind of getting out there and trying to be a direct response copywriter. I had no idea what I was doing, but I'm a good writer. I've always been a good writer. I wrote my website, which was my one-way spikes of doom website, which people still bring up sometimes. Because it was like, the incredible one-way spikes of doom marketing technique that hoovers money out of your prospects' pockets. And, this was my first experience of really getting into hype, but it worked because it was the one-way spikes of doom, which the idea there is when you're at the airport and you drive over the spikes, but if you back up, it's going to break your tires. So I did that, and I started hanging out my shingle as a freelance copywriter. And Harlan recommended that I go to Big Seminar 5, I believe it was, in Atlanta. And I'd never gone to a business thing before, and it was like $2,000 to go. It was back when you could charge $2,000 for a seminar, right? Especially you could charge $2,000 for a pitch seminar, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I go there, and Harlan had said, just go out there and paper the room with your business cards. So I did. I went to every seat in the room. I put my business cards down. Armin Morin got super angry about it, but the damage was done. My card was already out there, Ask for forgiveness, not permission, my friend.
That's right.
And at that event, I met Larry Benet, who's still a friend of mine. Called himself the Connector. He's big on the social networking stuff. And he introduced me to Jeff Paul. I don't know if you know who Jeff is, but he used to be really big in direct response, the make money online niche. And he had info.
He was with Dan Kennedy, right?
Yeah, way back when. But then his life fell apart. He got in trouble with the government, things like that.
A lot of people do.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him in a while. I never have, and I'm happy about that. I did my first job. I got paid $10,000 by Jeff to write a package about franchising stuff for whatever. And we never ended up using it because there were legal reasons you couldn't do it, but that was my first big gig. And that kind of got me started as a direct response copywriter. And I think within...
So real quick though, did you charge, because was that your first big gig, and did he suggest to pay you 10 grand or did you ask for the 10 grand?
I think I asked for it. And I had very little experience at that point. I think I'd written 2 sales letters. But he had read my page on my own site, and he's like, well, we know you're good. So, because even then I was pretty good. I was pretty decent. I have a talent for this, and I'm a good writer. I know how to write emotional kind of stuff. I always have. I've written plays and things like that in the past. And so I did that, and that kind of got me off to the races. And within like 6 months, I made $100,000 gross, which was insane. So I went from making like 70 grand gross the year before to 120. I think I made $180,000 that year, which was amazing. Like I was, oh my God. And I became an arrogant fuckhead, right? Like because again, I'm bipolar. I didn't know it, but bipolar makes you very arrogant and very narcissistic. And I had always had such a low opinion of myself, and I had no self-esteem. I thought I was a total piece of shit. But all of a sudden, I was making some money. So I'm like, oh yes, I make some money. I'm so great. And I would just talk about it to everybody, and it was just the most obnoxious thing. And for the next like 5-ish years, I think, next 5 years or so, I did freelance copy. And I did a whole bunch of stuff in the make money online niche. I did a whole bunch of stuff in the alternative health niche. I kind of wrote all the letters that my friend Joe Barton used to build his company. He paid $5 grand a pop back in the day. And like, of course I talked to him now. He's like, I made so much money off those letters. And I'm like, he's like, you should have charged me so much more. I'm like, yeah, I probably should have, but I didn't know that. And so I did a bunch of, the short version of the story is that, I ended up getting involved with like Jeff Walker and his product launch formula kind of stuff and product launch manager stuff. He became a mentor of mine. But I did, I kind of had good years and bad years. I think like my best year as a freelancer, I probably made about 300 grand. My worst year, I probably made about 150. And it was hustle, man. It was fucking hustle all the time, right? Yeah. So even when you have a name, and I developed a pretty good name pretty quickly. Even when you have a name, it's still like I was writing 2, 3, 4 letters a week. I mean, a month, not a week.
Still a lot, dude.
It is a lot. And I was busting them out, and I was making between like, $15,000 and $30,000 a month and whatnot. But every project was just like, okay, you do it and then you're done. And where's the money coming from?
Yeah.
Right? Where's the money coming from? And I thought about trying to do my own products at one point, but it seemed so intimidating. And I look back on it now, it's like the people that were hiring me were just fucking random assholes, right? Yeah. Just covered the online marketing thing. And I was smarter than a lot of them, and I had more talent, but I was trapped in this box that I had around what I was allowed to do and how much success I was allowed to have. I couldn't ever imagine being a millionaire. That was insane. What are you talking about? And then I did a job called Mobile Money Machines for this guy, Jay Diebold. And
why does it sound so familiar? How long ago was that?
About 10 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah.
So Mobile Money Machines, I wrote that one, and so it's total magic software scam, right? So they called me up and they're like, Chris, how you doing, man? Like, you're great. Like, we're big fans of your shit and whatever. And like, we really want to crush it with this offer. And so they hired me. They paid me 25 grand to do a letter, and I wrote the letter in 2 days, right? Because that's what I do. I don't write slow. I can't. People ask me, Chris, how do you write so fast? And my response is, how do you write so slow? I honestly don't understand it. I mean, you just sit down at the computer and you keep typing, right? Like that's how you get past writer's block.
So you don't get. See, this is something I love because you're obviously, I assume, even with your own business. Are you tight with your own deadlines? Like, do you hit your deadlines and shit?
Well, here's the deal. I have never missed a deadline in my life. The problem with owning the business is nobody can give you a deadline. Right? So there are times in my own stuff when I procrastinated plenty of times. But when I was working with clients, I never missed a fucking deadline in my life. And if I said I was going to do something, I would do it. Mm-hmm. I've gotten a lot better. The last few years got kind of crazy, so there was stuff that happened. But I did that letter for them, and it did really, 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 really well. They made, I think, like $10 million in sales in like a month or something, and well. And I was talking to Jay on the phone at one point, and he said, and I said, dude, how's it going? He's like, oh, dude, it's crushing it. It's so good. You're so amazing. And I said, oh, that's awesome. You should send me a bonus. And he's like, yeah, I should send you a bonus. I'm going to send you a bonus. And they sent me a bonus. They sent me a $5,000 check. Now, even now, when I have had a significant amount of financial success in my life and feel pretty secure, $5,000 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But compared to what they had made off of my back.
$10 million.
Yeah. And granted, I mean, that was not all because of me. They did a lot of work. They did all the affiliate stuff, et cetera. But it was not that much compared. And I just was like, what the fuck am I doing? What the fuck am I doing? And that was what kind of got me to really start thinking about doing my own stuff. And so at that point, and I've never had a passion for the make money online stuff. I just never have. I'm not a car guy, right? Like I'm just not. And so writing copy about like how you can have a Ferrari and how like, and how, women are going to wet themselves when you drive down the street and shit. But the copy I wrote about online marketing, by the way, was not so much about the aspirational stuff. It was much more about the kill your alarm clock and not having to get up in the morning and just like break yourself going down the driveway and cramming yourself into your car, and just that feeling of dread you have when you're going to the office, which all came from when I was a temp, right? Because I knew what that was like. I knew what that was like. When I wrote an offer for Joe Barton about back pain or something like that, I knew what that was like. When I did a heart attack one, my dad died of a heart attack. I knew what that was like. It's kind of like method acting in a lot of ways. So I ended up creating my Text Your Wife Into Bed program, just because I was talking to Mike Hill on the phone about ideas or something, and he was like, you should do, and I was like, oh, I should do a texting program. I'm good at texting girls. Like, why don't we do a texting program? He's like, you should do one called Text Your Wife Into Bed. And I was like, I'll do that. And so I did that, and I put it up, and it's still on ClickBank. It still makes some decent money every year, with no work on my part whatsoever at this point.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I put it up, and it was like October of 2009, I think. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I put it on ClickBank. I paid a couple grand for somebody to do it, and I bootstrapped it. I'm like, okay, well, I can afford myself, and I'm a good copywriter. I can afford myself, and I'm a good writer, right? And I can afford myself, and I'm pretty good at doing voiceovers and being on camera because I used to act and do things like that. So those are kind of the biggest expenses, and I was able to do them all myself, and I did. And that product, I remember one morning waking up and magically out of nowhere, I had made $700 overnight. And I was like, where the fuck did that come from? I just made $700. And also I saw people I knew buying the product. That was really funny. Like guys in our industry who were buying it. So I made like $30,000 in sales that first 3 months or so. And I was like, this is amazing. Oh my God, what is this? At the same time, Jeff Walker asked me to come speak at his event. Actually, Jeff asked me because here's a magical question you can ask anybody that works really well. I've used this many times over the years. I put it in products. It's a great question. I was at one of Jeff's events, and Jeff liked me. And at one point, he even pulled me aside because I ended up speaking a little bit at one of his project launch manager events because he got sick and somebody had to be on stage. And he was like, and John Walker was like, hey, Chris, can you cover this? I'm like, yes. And I go up there. And later Jeff was like, you have a lot of talent. Why are you working with other people? Why are you doing this? But my self-esteem was down here, right? It was just down. I both had tremendous narcissism and no self-esteem. It's an interesting combination. But Jeff, I asked Jeff at one point, I was like, Jeff, you have your product launch formula event coming up. What would I have to do between then and now to make it an absolute no-brainer for you to want to have me on your stage? And he said, that's a really interesting question. And eventually he said, you know what, I want you to go and I want you to talk about copywriting stuff. I want you to do about copy strategies for launches for an hour. And I said, sure. And here's the deal with that question. He didn't ask me to do anything else, but by doing it in that way, which was much more humble and not like, I wasn't asking him for anything. I was saying, what can I do to make this good for you? Right.
I literally just wrote down the question. I'm like,
it's a good question. And so I ended up doing that speech, and I'm very good on stage. I don't know if you've ever seen me talk on stage.
Yeah, I saw you have something at Mind Valley that you did.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I get a lot of messages about that talk on a regular basis.
Yeah, dude, it's the #1 thing, or used to be at least, when you type in copywriting.
Oh really? Well, that would do it.
So I would type it in. I'm like, holy fuck, this is like gold.
And I've got my mutton chops, and I'm wearing my toe shoes. And a lot of the comments are like people saying like, I can't take a man seriously who has mutton chops and toe shoes. And my response is, yes, you should definitely not listen to me. None of this works at all. So I did that speech though, and this woman named Amal Wagner was in the audience, and she came up to me afterwards and she said, Chris, you have a lot of talent, and I want to put you on television. And I said, for what? She's like, well, what do you got? And I was like, well, I've got this Text Your Wife Into Bed thing. And she said, okay, we can't do that. That's too dirty. What else you got? And I remember we were on the phone, and my now ex-employee, Megan, was on there with me. She was my assistant at the time. And we were talking about the ideas. She said, we should call it like Text the Romance Back or something. I'm like, that's a great idea. And so we did this PR push for Text the Romance Back. We created a website for it, and we started putting things out there. And I started going on like local television. I was just telling my wife about this yesterday when we were down by the stuff. And I started doing all this local television. I started doing phone calls with like, blogs and other stuff and whatever else. And there was no product, mind you. There was no product whatsoever. put the, ask permission, don't ask permission, ask for forgiveness, do it later. Eventually, Rachel Ray's people called us up. And this was right when like Tiger Woods had gotten into a ton of trouble for like texting porn stars. And Rachel Ray called us up and said, hey, we may want to have Michael come on our show. And so that was a back and forth. And eventually,
so this is what they called you. They didn't even know you were Chris.
No, not that point. No, I got to say, that's not a big deal, right? Like in the entertainment world, that television world, that they're used. I mean, Tom Cruise's name is not Tom Cruise, right?
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I'm one of those normals that doesn't know this shit.
His last name is like Tom Mapo or something like that, right?
Well, that's not as sexy.
No, exactly. You got to be Tom Cruise. Name. Actually, even the reason that I did Michael Fiore, there's a few of them. One of which was if you did Google searches for Chris Haddad, you would find a lot of marketing stuff, and I didn't really want that attached to what I was doing. Also, I'm Lebanese. I'm Middle Eastern, and I live in America. And there's a bit of racism in America. It's a thing, And there's a reason I don't call myself Haddad, right? It's a bad idea. So I used my middle name, my mom's maiden name, and became Michael Fiore because that's Italian. Italian has more of a love thing going on to it, right? But anyway, they flew me out to New York City, and the short version is that I ended up going on the show. I did a 6-minute bit. Beforehand, the producer was like, actually, I wrote the entire product, like 25,000 words in 2 days, right before going to New York City. We get it put up on ClickBank, do all this kind of shit. And I go out there. A bunch of crazy shit happens while I'm there, but in the interest of time. And like right before I go out there, the producer is like, we want to talk about romantic texting. This isn't about sexting. It's about romantic texting. And I said, cool, it's about romantic texting. No problem. And I hadn't worn a t-shirt under my shirt, so I was like sweating because it's really warm back there. And Imal was like pinning my coat closed. And I see myself on the clip now, and I'm like super stiff because my back was so fucked up. But I get out there, and Rachel's like sitting to my right. She's like right here, and she's like doing her thing because she films like 4 shows a day when they do fun filming days, right? Because that's just how they do it. People ask me later, they're like, "What was Rachel like?" I'm like, "She was at work."
She was going.
Yeah, we didn't have like a deep conversation. She was at work. But I go out there, and the warm-up guy who kind of keeps the crowd warm between segments is like, the comedian out in the audience. He starts making fun of me, and I'm like, "Oh, this is great. I'm from Massachusetts," and I throw some shit back at him because that's what you do. I'm like, he's like insults me a little bit. I'm like, cool, yeah, fuck you, it's good, and I immediately relax, and it's great. And then like the very
that's funny that them making fun of you relaxed you. Oh, fuck it, back at home.
Well, where I'm from, like this is how you say hello, right? When I moved to the West Coast and tried that, people got really mad. They wrote blogs about it and everything. It was really awful. I had to learn how to be a Seattleite over the course of a lot of years.
That's too funny.
And then like the very, very flamingly gay, like makeup guy comes out and he's like patting my head to try to get the shine off. And I'm immediately incredibly comfortable, right? I'm just like, this is great. And I've been on stage before, I've done things. So then the camera rolls and the first thing Rachel says is, let's talk about sexting. And the entire segment gets thrown out the way it was. But I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm like, yes, Rachel, let's talk about sexting, let's go. And we did, and it was like 6 minutes, and I did pretty well at it. I felt very comfortable. I like performing. I like doing things like that. And that did not lead to a ton of sales. It really didn't. Like because of the way it's done, television is not going to get you a ton of sales. It's going to get you credibility. It's going to get you out there. But all of a sudden, I could say that Michael Fiore was an internationally known relationship expert who'd appeared on Rachel Ray, who'd appeared on these other things. I put a minute of that clip in the front of the original Text the Romance Back sales letter. And that kind of was off to the races. And before that, I had been doing products primarily aimed at men. I'd done Text Your Wife into Bed, and then I'd done one called, what the hell's the name of it? I know that the URL, it's still up, is howtogethead.com.
That's actually the one when I talk about you.
Yeah, howtogethead.com. And because I was like, I remember I did Text Your Wife into Bed, and I didn't even have upsells back then. I had no idea what the fuck I was doing, right? And the money I didn't make. But yeah, but I remember thinking like, well, what should my follow-up be? And you got to think of something. I'm like, well, what do men want? I'm like, men want blowjobs. I will do a product about how to get your wife or your girlfriend to want to give you a blowjob. And I interviewed women I knew about it, and like, oh, it was great. But I learned pretty quickly, for me at least, that the women's market was far more lucrative for me. And I never liked the pickup stuff. I didn't like that whole, I mean, I know a lot of people in that niche. I never liked the idea of like manipulating women into like fucking you and shit like that. Cause that's not how I would do my life either. It's like, you want to get a woman to fuck you, make it seem like a fun thing, you know, make it seem like she's not going to regret it afterwards. Women like sex, by the way. Weirdly enough, they like it a lot if you do it right and if you know how to pull their hair right and you know how to do all the right shit, right? But we're kind of off to the races at that point. And like suddenly, I think the first year after that, we made like 600 grand gross. And the year after
much
that,
better than just being a copywriter, huh?
yeah, oh, well, a lot better, yeah. And I was only writing a couple letters a year and doing emails and things like that instead. And then I think my first big year, I made $1.8 million after expenses. And I saved, by the way, the first year I made 7 figures, I saved 7 figures.
Wow. Well, that's something big in itself right there.
Yeah. So I think I made 1.8. I paid like 600 grand in taxes. I lived off $150,000, $200,000, which is plenty, right?
Dude, good for you.
Yeah. And I saved $1 million. And then like, it was kind of off to the races and things got a little nuts over the next couple of years. I did a ton of products like back to back. I did Text and Romance back. I did Text Your Ex back. I did one called The Secret Survey, which is about, we still sell a lot of that one. I did, and then we did like a couple others, but at the same time, I started getting really sick. I was just, I was doing CrossFit and stuff at the time, which is crazy because the whole left side of my body didn't work, but I was
doing CrossFit?
Yeah. And I was deadlifting 430 pounds with one leg, basically. It's crazy because I'm very stubborn. I'm extremely stubborn.
Just a flesh wound.
Exactly. It is both a good thing and a bad thing. I'm very, very, very stubborn. And my wife, Angie, like, she's like, you can't go to yoga today. I'm like, why? She's like, you can barely walk today. You're not allowed to go to yoga. I'm like, but I have to. She's like, no, it's okay, baby. You can say, like, I'm going to get fat. She's like, you're in amazing shape. What do you do? Like, no, it's awful. But I started getting really, really sick, really sick. Like I could barely get out of bed, kind of sick. And I started getting really angry all the time. And my brain started kind of slowing down. And I just became really.
Can you move your mic real quick just so we can hear you a little better? My bad.
Is this better? Is this okay?
I don't know. You were doing so good.
The mic's right here, so.
Oh, fuck. I'm like thinking it's on your collar or something. I don't know.
Do you want me to switch over?
Oh, there you go. Something happened,
cool.
man.
All right, great. So I started getting really, really sick, and I started becoming a version of myself that isn't that great. And I'd always struggled with depression pretty much constantly, but all of a sudden I was just angry all the time. And people that know me for a long time, I was always pretty ADD. Oh, I didn't even tell you about getting arrested at Burning Man. That's a whole other story. Yeah. If we do another one, I'll go back and I'll do that one.
We'll have to do a part 2.
That's a good story, getting arrested at Burning Man.
That's a good hook for part 2.
I was on probation for 3 years. I wasn't allowed to drink. I had to go to rehab, which is hilarious for my friends. You never even did any drugs or anything, but you had to go to rehab. That's a whole other thing. But again, I was always so in my head, and it was always just like this tornado of horror in my brain all the time. And so people that knew me from work even would think I was really standoffish. Right? Like I'd either be like the center of attention and be really funny and whatever else, or I'd kind of be off in the corner, feeling a lot of emotional and physical pain all the time, thinking I was a piece of shit, and then bragging about how awesome I was as a way to kind of deal with that. Because I was trying, here's a little pearl of wisdom. If somebody's bragging about how awesome they are, it means they're trying to convince themselves, not you. Right? That's a fact. It's just the way it is. The most insecure people are the people that try to project the most confidence. Right? Natural confidence is not something you try to project. It's just something you kind of have. I am very happy that people seem to think I'm very confident these days because I'm like, I don't think I'm that confident at all. And then I'll walk up to anybody and say hello. So there you go. But
were you always like that though? I mean, I don't want to get too off track, but were you always like being, because that's probably what helped you get clients if you were like that, able to go and say hello to random strangers.
Well, I learned how to. I was really, really bad. I mean, I didn't have friends when I was younger. Like when I was in like high school and such, I mean, especially when I was really young, when I was a little kid, I didn't have any friends. I had no idea how to do that. The thing was, when I started doing freelance writing way back when, it was either talk to people or starve, like that's just the way it was. And so I learned real quick. Like I never even drank before that, but it's like, well, business gets done at the bar. And I would go to conferences and I was just like, well, dude, I need to pay my fucking rent next month. And so I learned how to go talk to people. And even over the years, I would talk to other copywriters. And I'm like, because copywriters tend to like cluster, right? Like they cluster in the corner and they talk to each other. And I'd walk over to them and be like, what the fuck are you doing? And they're like, what do you mean? Like the clients are over there. Like, go have a drink, go to the fucking strip club, Make them remember. Don't even talk business. Like you don't network by talking business. You network by being funny. You network by, having a deep conversation. You make friends. I always said the only thing I would buy at a conference, I never bought products. The only thing I would buy at a conference was a relationship, right? Like I'd buy a drink. I would buy dinner. I'd go to the fucking strip club. I don't even like strip clubs. I think strip clubs are boring as fuck, but I would go anyway. But I started getting really, really sick. And over the course of 9 months, I had the flu all the time and I was just tired and whatever. And eventually, over about 9, 10, 11 months, eventually I got diagnosed with Lyme disease. Yeah. And the next few years were really fucking awful, plain and simple, quite honestly. I mean, it was I fell apart as a human being. I was sleeping 16 hours a day. And I fell deeper and deeper into a pretty massive depression, massive. And of course, I didn't know it because you never know it. And again, my tendency is I push forward and push forward and push forward. That is what I do, right? And my girlfriend at the time had to suffer through a lot of stuff with me. She also got sick with a lot of stuff, and it was really awful. At the same time, I was actually putting out offers. I put out one called Capture His Heart, Make Him Love You Forever, and some other stuff. I ended up going to Florida and going to this like clinic in Florida for 7 months where I was paying like $3,000 a week for treatment.
Wow.
I'm very lucky though that I could do that I had the money to be able to do that, right? Because I spent, 6 figures on treatment.
Is this after you saved your 7 figures?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
See, that's really interesting. I mean, I don't know how the universe works and stuff, but I think sometimes when we do things, we'll do it unconsciously to prepare for a future bad thing that's going to happen. Because bad shit's going to keep happening.
I think the thing is, my attitude towards money is very different than a lot of people in our industry. And I talked to friends of mine about this, and like a lot of the people who are rich are not rich, right? A lot of people that you see on Facebook who are showing off their Lambo, like, I don't want to talk shit about Ty Lopez, but fuck Ty Lopez. I don't like that guy. But he's just full of absolute shit, right? Like, I have no idea how he's doing now, but I do know several years ago when he was bragging about being super rich, he was dead broke. He just was, right? And he probably still is now, and he's a douchebag, and I don't like him. So there you go. I don't like him because he fucked over people I love.
Really?
I won't get into the story right now, but I don't like him for actual reasons, not because he's like, whatever.
Right.
I know him personally, and I don't like him. And I'm very open about that because I think people should know that he's a douchebag.
That's good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, I got super duper sick. And I do think like if I had not made money when I made money, I would either be dead or homeless or in an insane asylum right now. I just would be. There's no, like if the math had worked out a little differently, if I was still doing freelance copy, when I got super duper sick, I don't know how I would have gotten through the next few years. It would have been impossible. Right.
Do you remember how old you were when you had first gotten sick?
Like 32, about your age.
Yeah, because you were talking about it, and it sounds like you were almost, you would probably, transition maybe just a couple years before that from freelancing into... Yeah,
it was like 2 years in, basically. So at that point in my life, like my career was going insanely well, and I was making a fuck ton of money. My personal life was the worst it could possibly be, right? But I got attached to this idea of being like a $2 million guy. I think my best year ever, I made like 2.3 million personally or something. And I saved as much as I could. My financial advisor loves me. She's always like, you are the weirdest and most wonderful client I have. I think it's because when I was growing up, like my parents were both raised poor. And therefore, when we were growing up, they just spoiled the fuck out of us. And then I spent like, 6 years dead broke in my 20s. And so when I started making some money, I was like, I don't want to spend this. I want to save it. My biggest nightmare to this day is having to get a job. Right? Like that's the worst possible. And even the last few years, I didn't make the money I used to the last 4 years or so, but I've been fine, right? Because I never, like my lifestyle never got obnoxious, and I have a nice house, but everything else I have is pretty standard, right? And I see these people who like would make money. I have one friend who just told me he finally paid off a $1.6 million tax debt because he didn't pay taxes for 4 years. I have another guy who told me that he, has another giant IRS thing. I know somebody else who like went from, living in a $5 million mansion to living in a $1,000 a month apartment that he can barely afford. Like a lot of these people who get out there and are bragging about how great they are doing are dead broke and they're idiots. And they like, I mean, dude, and I tell everybody, I tell all the young guys who I talk to, because one of the things I really like doing is meeting guys who are just at the beginning of it. The guys who just have an offer that takes off or whatever else, they're in their late 20s, early 30s. And I'm like, listen to me. I'm going to give you some advice right now. And the advice is keep your old friends, don't talk to them about how well you're doing. Nobody actually wants to hear it. And save your fucking money. Like, save as much as you can. It is not going to last forever. This ride is not going to last forever. You are not as smart as you think you are, right? If you remember back, like when I talked about the greeting card people, the worst thing that ever happened to them was they won an award. Well, I'm not going to drop names right now, but I have several friends who, they created an offer. It became a ClickBank #1. They thought they were geniuses. They were like, oh my God. And they thought, I can do this over and over again, right? Like, dude, I've written a lot of sales letters. I've written quite a few that have ended up being ClickBank #1s. I can't do it over and over again. It is fucking hard. It is fucking hard. Getting something like the new offer I have that converts as well as it does is a fucking unicorn. It's rare as hell. And so I know a lot of people who, I know two guys who had an offer that did incredibly well for several years. They were pulling in 400 grand a month and they're both broke.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't even because they spent it all on personal stuff. They grew their business, right? They invested it back in the business. Well, there was no business to invest it back into. As John Carlton says, you don't have a business, you have a fucking sales letter. A sales letter is not a fucking business, right?
Well, that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, John's a smart guy. I love John. So anyway,
I have a fucking sales letter, not a business.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
So I got super duper sick. My personal life was awful. I was in physical pain all the time. I was exhausted all the time. I had a doctor once look at like a brain scan, and he asked me, he said, Chris, I'm surprised by 3 things right now. And I'm like, what's that? He said, okay, first of all, I'm surprised you can even get out of bed, because people with these numbers do not get out of bed. I'm like, well, I'm really stubborn, right? And he said, second of all, he's like, you really like cocaine, huh? I'm like, I've never tried cocaine. And he's like, why is that? I'm like, because I'm pretty sure I really like cocaine. And he's, yeah. And he said, yeah, well, with the way your brain is set up, you would become a coke addict pretty quickly, because basically the reward center of my brain just doesn't work, right? Like, it just doesn't. So even when I was doing offers, like when I did Language Desires, the biggest thing I did, there's a great picture of me with an IV in my arm in Florida while I'm running a launch, basically. And it did amazingly well. That offer kind of got me through the last 4 or 5 years, actually. I mean, it still makes decent money, but for a while there, we were making like 20 grand a day on that offer.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was insane. And I have no idea where the traffic came from, right? I'm like, I don't want to know. It just shows up. It's great. I don't want to know. Don't tell me about it. I don't want to know. Yeah. Where was? Oh yeah. So he told me that, and they said the third thing is, I'm surprised you haven't tried to kill yourself yet.
You haven't? I'm sorry, what?
He said, I'm surprised you haven't tried to kill yourself yet.
Wow.
Yeah. Because my brain I had no testosterone, I had no epinephrine or adrenaline, I had no serotonin, I had no nothing. I was dry as a bone. But so I spent like a year there. Like, I came back home. My marriage, I got married at some point in there to my first wife, and it was horrible. We basically recreated my parents' relationship where they were screaming at each other all the time. We were both sick. I look back on it now. Of course, at the time, I thought it was all her. But looking back on it now, and looking back on my mental health issues and everything else, it must have been pretty awful for her too. And if I could talk to her, I would tell her that, and I would apologize for my part of it. I don't think she would apologize for her part of it, unfortunately, because that's a hard thing. Because it takes 2 to tango. Yeah. But then I started to slowly kind of get over the physical stuff. And this was like 4 years ago. Me and Angie got together. I actually knew her through work stuff, and we ended up we'd always been really attracted to each other, and then we ended up kind of falling in love and made that happen. And I thought at that point, I was like, okay, I'm healthy-ish. I was able to I felt more healthy than I had. And I thought, this was 4 years ago, and I'm like, I'm going to hit it hard. I'm going to come out of the fucking chute again. I'm going to become Mr. Moneyfingers Haddad again. I'm going to be et cetera. And I didn't. Instead, I became I don't even know what I became. I was smoking weed every day just to get through the day. And I was I was going through like 3 or 4 joints a day. I was like eating edibles like they were candy, because they are candy. And I kind of became a shell of myself. I mean, my brain really fell apart. My self-confidence went away. I spent most of my time self-medicating with weed because I was just it was just horrible. Over the course of a couple of years, and poor Angie had to deal with this, and we're great now, but she still has some pretty severe PTSD from having to deal with me being a fucking maniac, basically, right? It took a couple of years in when I was just, and again, I mean, people that know me, the personality I was showing, I became a very different person. I lost all my confidence. I just became this very, that's when I was posting pictures of myself in tights on Facebook all the time and things like that. There's stuff I'm very embarrassed about from that time. But Eventually, Angie and some other friends were able to convince me something was wrong because I was straight up delusional. I thought I could read people's minds, basically. I thought I was like, had like magical powers almost. I thought and I was so convinced that everybody hated me and all this other kind of shit. And eventually, like I remember I ended up like screaming my head off in the basement at one point and became convinced that my mom had molested me, which never happened. Like that never happened, but it became true. I mean, I look back at old journal entries and it's like, oh my God. But eventually Angie was able to convince me that something was wrong. And I remember like we had this big fight and we had never really had fights before, but over the course of like that month, we'd had all these big fights. And I remember like we took a time out and I came back up to her and I'm like, honey, you are telling me that up is down, left is right, the sky is plaid, and dogs are like, robots from the future that want to kill us all. I can see the sky is not plaid. I can see the dog is very nice, but you're telling me all these things. And I love you and I do not want to lose you. So I'm going to choose to believe that you might be right, that you might be. And there's this tiny little crack in the idea of my perception of reality, because I was delusional. And through that, she came with me to my therapist, she came with me to my psychiatrist, we ended up going to a different psychiatrist and eventually, a different therapist actually. And eventually we were able to find somebody who said, well, this really sounds like bipolar 2 disorder. And I freaked out because the last thing I wanted to be was crazy. Because I've always been a weird guy, I've always been an intense guy, but I never wanted to be crazy. People calling me crazy over the years would always really piss me off because I don't want to be crazy.
Of course.
But after that, it actually got a lot easier because all of a sudden I had a diagnosis and I could look at all the times I'd been a massive asshole to people and be like, oh, there's a reason that I was acting that way. It wasn't just because I'm inherently a bad person, it's because there was actually a reason. And there's some things that I did back then that are actually quite useful. I was always the guy who would call bullshit on people, right? I have no problem with that. People would be going around, and I'm like, you're fucking fine. I mean, I remember one time I had my feet up on the table at ClickBank, and the CEO is saying some things, and Brad Howard says something, and Mike Geary says something, and it comes around to me, I'm like, you're fucking full of shit. What is wrong with you? And he was full of shit, and he needed to hear that, right? So that
you got that quality. You just did it with Ty.
I did just do it with Ty. And honestly, I would say that to Ty's face. I would have no problem whatsoever saying that to Ty's face.
Yeah, but see, these are good qualities. It's somebody, that's somebody you can respect because that's somebody who's going to tell you the truth, right?
No, totally. Yeah, totally. There's a certain, people ask me sometimes how I get away with saying the things I say. And I say, well, it's because there's a consistency to it, right? And also
I haven't stopped for 40 years.
No, exactly. But I've learned how to be, somebody called me tactful. A friend of mine, my friend Megan, called me tactful the other day. And I was like, the meds are working. Wonderful. And I said, yeah. And whenever something like that, and actually, what was it? Somebody from ClickBank. I was at a mastermind a few weeks ago. And Darcy from ClickBank, who's kind of new there, I was like, oh yeah, you're like the humblest vendor we have. I'm like, the meds are working. But the short version is I eventually got put on medication. It still took a solid year from that point to get to the point that I was on the right meds. I would say I've only been in a place that feels stable for about 6 months now. And it's only been in the last 2 or 3 months that I've really felt like I could work it all. I'm really lucky that my team, my staff was able to...
Is the mic open again? My bad, man. I just want to make sure everybody can hear you.
Hello.
All right, there we go.
Well, I guess I have to shout right at it.
Just shout at the fucking thing.
I should have used the other one, but next time. Anyway, like it's over the last like 3 or 4 months, I finally kind of got my brain back. And I remember at one point when I was in Florida, my wife at the time and I were there, and we're watching like at midnight, that Chris Hardwick show from a few years ago. And some stuff comes up and my wife asked me, she's like, well, what would you say? You're funny. And I remember being like, I don't know. Like, I just wasn't funny anymore. I wasn't witty anymore. My brain, I had lost so much of my intelligence and my wit, and I just was not myself. And so finally, over the last few months, I feel that coming back and I feel some confidence again. But I also feel very humbled. I feel absolutely and utterly humbled. I went from making several $1 million a year to making several $100,000 a year, but not what I was used to. And that can be very, very difficult emotionally, when you're like, okay, this is the level that I'm at. It's not even about what you buy with the money. That doesn't matter at all. When you get past the point where your bills are paid, it doesn't really matter, but the ego is there. And I got ripped to shreds. I got torn absolutely down, and I'm really happy it happened. I wouldn't want to go through it again. I wouldn't want anybody else to go through it. There are more challenges coming, I'm sure. But in general, I feel better than I ever have in my life. And the business has changed. I really feel like I kind of was like mentally missing. I kind of was lost about 4 or 5, 6 years of my life that are kind of actually difficult to remember in a lot of ways.
Was it like a fuzz, kind of like
yeah, there's a fuzz. There's definitely a fuzz, especially when I was stoned all the time for 2 years straight. That didn't help. Part of the problem with that was, weed is legal in Seattle, and I had enough money that I could buy as much as I wanted, right? So there was no real limiter. I could go. I was buying spending $60 on weed every other day, but who cares, right? That didn't matter. I mean, back when I was poor in my 20s, that never would have happened because it's 60. That was a couple $100 a month. Oh my God. But yeah, no, I'm at where I'm at, and I'm really happy that my new offer is starting to do really well. But it's a challenge, and I feel I like this version of myself better, and I'm excited about what gives me the most pleasure these days and makes me the happiest these days is like helping people that are going through stuff like I was. Like somebody wrote me the other day, and they were all surprised I wrote them back, and I'm like, well, you've got bipolar, of course I'm going to write you back, right? Like there's nothing in the world. It's so funny because people are so intimidated by me sometimes, which is the funniest thing. Like I'm at like TNC, and like I'm hanging out with Darcy and Shannon from ClickBank and Mike, and like and they're just laughing because people are like afraid to come say hi, or they come over and they're like, oh my God, Chris, you're so amazing, and I'm like, that's really nice to meet you. And it's just like, because I'm not that impressed with myself anymore. I used to be a hell of a lot more impressed with myself, but now it's just like, I don't know, shit happens. Fame is like, any kind of fame is a funny thing. Like right now, my PR agent is coming to me and saying, hey, Chris, do you want to get back out there and do the Michael Fiore thing again? Or do you want to write a book as yourself? Or do you want to do this? And I'm like, maybe, but I'm a little afraid of, well, for one thing, doing that stuff has a lot of downsides. The way people treat you changes quite a bit. I had a stalker a couple of years ago for Michael Fiore. And also, I am prone to narcissism, and I don't want to fall into that again. And when you have people telling you that you are the shit all the time, and that you're amazing all the time, that can kind of, I think I've gotten pretty good at being able to hear, especially in the copy world, people that say that and be like, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you like the work. It's hard. It's not the easiest thing to do. But I'm trying to figure out what happens next, and it's nice to have, it's nice to be enjoying work again. It's nice to be kind of digging my company back out of the hole that it was in for a while. I really enjoy not being as emotionally volatile as I was. Being on the meds is a wonderful thing. The last few weeks have been really stressful, as I said before we got on the call, and I think if I didn't have the right medication, I'd be on the 4 right now. Yeah.
Well, we're talking about that. I mean, you've got a really hot offer that's kind of, I mean, it sounds like this is kind of the one that's going to bring you to where you, further than where you were in the past, because I saw the sales letter. I've been seeing it shared around. Like people are like, who the fuck wrote this thing? This is like sick. And so a lot of folks have been wanting to promote this, but I know you've actually been restricting affiliates, and you've actually put your own money into traffic.
I put $500,000 into traffic. So
yeah, dude. And so this shit works. So talk a little bit about that. Like, can people even promote that, or more about you, man?
So we're keeping it whitelist only right now for a few reasons. One of which is that we're making money on it. We're not making a ton of money on it day one with our paid traffic, but we don't need to. Right? Like that's not really what it's about. We're making, we'll spend 10, 15, 20 grand a day. We'll make $1,000, $2,000 or $3,000 profit that day. But more important than that, we get the list, right? We get the actual people on the list, and that's really where you make the money. By the way, direct marketing, online marketing is harder now than it was 5 years ago. It just is. It's not as easy. I mean, I'm really good at this, and it's still really fucking hard, right? And also because I don't want scam traffic at this point. I've dealt with that over the years. It was great back in the day when I could put an offer up and traffic magically appeared. That doesn't really happen anymore anyway. And I don't want to deal with people sending me hundreds of thousands of clicks that they got through some kind of spam thing. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. And what I also want is I want the affiliates who are promoting me to make some really good money, right? I want control over it. I want to be able to say, hey, fuck off. You're not somebody I want. And I want to be able to also have the people that we do let promote be like, hey, this is your little part of the pie. Take your little part of the pie and go do it. And so far it's working pretty well. But I'm really glad, like the main thing is like we spent a lot of our own money over the last month. One day we lost 20 grand because we got hacked from China. That was great.
Wow.
Oh yeah, that was great. That was a hard.
You're in the big leagues now.
That's the problem though, because like the margins on day one traffic are pretty tight. So, if it's possible to spend 20, 30, 40, 50 grand and you won't make that much back, but as long as you're covering your nut, who cares? Well, then something breaks. And when something breaks, the more you're spending, the more devastating it can actually be. right?
Yeah.
And then things break, or you get attacked by people, or like the other day, we're like, we found out like a week ago that our first upsell wasn't working properly for 2 days. And so our AOV went from like 55, $60 to 42, which
Wow.
means we lost a lot of money those couple of days, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Because we're spending 40 something dollars to get the customer, and then you have to factor in refunds, and you got to factor in everything else. And it's a lot. It's very stressful.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're taking people on board a little bit now. It's really fun to kind of be back in the weeds on it. Though at the same time, like on Friday, I was really stressed out about a bunch of stuff, and I had to call Mike and my wife Angie, because Angie is doing a lot of work with us right now on content stuff. And I had to say, listen, guys, I know we're supposed to have a meeting at noon. I need to unplug for the next 4 days. And they're like, why? I'm like, because I can feel my bipolar stuff getting a little bit tickled right now. And the last thing any of us want is for me to fucking lose my shit again and fall back into the pit. And it's really hard to do that because, you know, I'm a stubborn guy. And so like 6, 7 years ago, I would have just like pushed through anyway and said, fuck it, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Instead, I had to like take a step back and be like, hey, I've got people in positions where I can trust them to do a good job. And I'm just going to have to, you know, hope that nothing breaks during that time. It's hard though. It's hard because when it's your money, like nobody cares about your money the same way you care about your money.
Of course.
Right. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. I really feel like I'm starting over in a lot of ways. It feels really good to be able to, when people like you or other people like tell me that I influence them in some way, or that they like my stuff or they learn something, it's really nice to be able to accept that, because when I was in the worst of my bipolar stuff, I thought I was the biggest piece of shit in the world, right? I thought I sucked in all ways. I thought you know, the imposter complex to a radical degree. And so I couldn't accept it. Like I would even go, I remember I went to TNC several years ago when I was deep in the middle of it. And I was so confused that people were treating me like I actually mattered in some way. And like I was like a big shot or something like that, right? It was really, really confusing. So it's nice to be able to go to things now. And I don't feel particularly egotistical about it, but I do feel like, hey, I've accomplished something. I've done some stuff. I've worked really hard for the success that I've had. And even if I'm not at the exact same level now that I was before, that doesn't like take away from the stuff I did before. And I saved millions of dollars, so fuck everybody.
Yeah, dude, 100%.
But the other thing is, but dude, I gotta tell you, guys, the way my brain works is like, oh, but I could have saved more. Like, if the Lyme disease thing hadn't happened, and if I hadn't gotten divorced, and if this hadn't happened, I could have twice as much money. And if I had twice as much money, I'd just be like, fuck it, I don't even care if I work anymore. Like I don't need to be like super duper rich to be happy. I just need about 150, 200 grand a year to pay my bills and live well, and I'm great, right?
Yeah.
So like, whatever. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now, and it feels good to be. I mean, honestly, like Angie was telling me like a couple of weeks ago when this offer really started to go, all of us, like things were going badly, things were going wrong in certain ways. It was converting really well on the front end, but there's a lot more to it. It's so funny because I posted we were doing like hundreds of sales. Like, you must be making so much money. I'm like, not yet. Like the money doesn't show up for a while, by the way. So you got to like keep the wheels on and hope. Yeah. And I've learned more about marketing in the last 3 weeks than I have in the last 5 years. Easily.
Yeah, with running those paid ads, you've probably learned a crap load.
Yeah, I've learned more than I want to in a lot of ways. But actually, Angie was telling me, because I started getting up at like 6 a.m. and I was working for like 9, 10 hours a day when I'd barely worked for years, right? Like even when I was running offers that were doing great, people were like, oh my God, you must work so hard all the time. Like I work 3 hours a day. What are you talking about? I sit down and do my shit and then I leave. But she just tells me that I've seemed a lot happier this last few weeks, just being engaged in all this stuff. And it feels really good to be interested in work again and to be like working on upsell pages. And actually I'm really happy is that Angie is taking over most of the content creation for Michael Fiore, because I've just honestly lost, like I don't mind being the guy as far as like on camera and stuff like that. I am so sick of writing about relationship stuff. And so sick about like, it's because you're just saying the same shit over and over again.
Right.
Like I find the marketing stuff really interesting because the psychology is really interesting. And like, like the newsletter that I did, like it is probably one of the best things I've ever written. And I'm really proud of that. I also worked my ass off on that letter. Like I did like 3 or 4 versions of that before finally, you know what finally made it good is I got the fuck out of my own way, right? I stopped trying to be clever about it. I stopped trying to have like some magical thing go on. I just told the fucking story. I just told the standard hero's journey story, but I applied to it what I know was the main anxieties of that market. And the issue we have right now is refunds are a little high because, well, the letter's really good, but having a product that can fulfill the letter is really hard. So Andy is working her butt off on that right now, and it's great because like the last thing I want to be doing is creating content right now. And also, it's not the best use of me, right?
Yeah.
Like the best use of me is the marketing stuff and writing emails and looking at upsells and coming up with new product. But I'm also like I have like 2 other projects I'm hoping to get to soon for a couple friends of mine, and it feels good. It just feels good to be back at work and to hopefully be a less obnoxious version of myself. That's what I'm kind of into right now.
Well, so if people want to be affiliates for this.
Oh yeah, that. So if you go to affiliates.hewillworshipu.com, affiliates.hewillworshipu.com, because I couldn't make him worship you because I was stupid and I announced the name of the product before we had bought the URL. And so an affiliate of ours bought the URL, and I got to say, hats off to him. He's getting a good number of sales for free every day because of that. And you know what? Good for him. I am proud of him. Son of a bitch, I am proud of him. Yeah.
So real quick, it's affiliates plural, right? Affiliates.
Yes, affiliates.
Worshipu.com.
Yeah, and there's an application there. It's a nice looking page. It says, like, I think the headline is, "Say hello to make him worship you, the astonishing women's relationship offer that converts on cold traffic and is making our exclusive group of waitlisted affiliates disgustingly rich."
That's what's up. I love it. I love it.
I'm writing this stuff. So we are looking for people. It's okay. Like, level of experience isn't really that important. Obviously, we would love to have kind of the super affiliates people because, as you know, 90% of your sales comes from 10% of your people or even 1% of your people. But if there are people who are willing to do things the ethical way, who are not like running, is this a scam sites and things like that, we'd love to have them on board. If you apply, it will probably take us a couple of days to get back to you as far as letting you know if we have approved you or not. I'm actually doing a lot of the affiliate management myself right now. So I give people like my Skype and my email address, and people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you did that." I'm like, I'm not actually famous.
That's that Michael guy.
That's that Michael guy, yeah. And
well, dude,
yeah.
Dude, you're the man. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Everybody go ahead, check it out. Affiliates.hewillworshipu.com. Go ahead, apply there. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Chris. You're the fucking man.
I'm very happy to do it. If you want to do more, I can tell you about how I got arrested at Burning Man. It's a lot.
Fuck yeah.
I will say, getting arrested at Burning Man is what led me to building my business. So I would not give it back. Yeah.
And that's the hook for part 2. See you guys on the next episode.